Do you remember the other week when I gave the lesson on the coming of life? I told the story about how all the elements, the air, the water, the rocks, and the sun were arguing because there was something wrong going on Earth. It was as if all the order that had been established by the creation of the universe was suddenly not so orderly. And what it took to turn everything around was that first tiny drop of jelly that the great creator had put in the oceans. And then I begin talking through all the different life forms that began after that. But let's look a little bit closer at the timeline of life. So here we can see at the very top of our timeline the different ages that there were. We see here the red lines all across the timeline. Now those indicate the beginning of some new development of animals. So the very first line, we see the beginning of the trilobites. Then we see the beginning of animals with hard shells. There's the crinoids and the cystoids. And if you look down at the bottom corner here, it talks about the land, and it says that the earth consisted of rocks and volcanoes. There was much movement on the earth, with land repeatedly rising and falling. Next, right around the time that creatures with hard shells were appearing, the climate was very warm and damp, and life only existed in the sea. And this was the age of the trilobites. As time passed, there's a general sinking of the land, and the sea covers the whole of Asia. The land is South America and Africa. There's a peninsula reaching out from Africa to include South India and Australia. The earth is covered with volcanoes. Towards the end of this period, great areas of land appear in North America. And the climate continues to be warm and damp. Lead ores, gas, and oil are forming. Cryptogamic plants almost certainly flourish. As time passed, life continues to only exist in the sea. The age of the trilobites begins to come to an end, and the forest of sea lilies is beginning to appear, along with some of the first vertebrates, those first creatures that had backbones. And it's interesting, you see here the beginning with our red lines, the primitive sea lilies disappearing, the corals beginning, the radiolaria beginning, and the sea lilies taking the form of trees as we follow those red lines. Right around this stage, we also have an ice age, as indicated by this icicle here. As time passed, the climate before that ice age was warm and damp, and shallow seas were prevalent. There was a great increase of life in the sea, like the corals and the radiolarians appearing rapidly, and the early cartilaginous fish appear. And as after the ice age, though, the first land and bog plants begin to appear. The first land animals also begin to come in the form of millipedes. Time moved on, and this is a period of 3 levels of ocean life. Near the coast, shellfish; in the middle, corals; and in the deep, the radiolarians. It's an age of great lagoons surrounded by deserts. By the middle of this period, the early forests come into existence. The climate is warm and damp at the beginning, but warm and dry at the end, and the armored fishes and the insects begin to appear. When we zoom back out, we can see that red line here at the bottom is a great development of insects, and also the great development of the amphibians, when some of those fish are exploring what it's like outside of the water, and they had developed lungs that could also breathe air. Following this, there's a repeated sinking and emergence of the land. The climate is tropical, warm, and damp up to the poles. There's a dense forest of club mosses and horsetails. There's a great development of fish and amphibians. Among the insects appear giant dragonflies that are 4 feet long. Can you imagine? Giant cockroaches and termites, land snails, and tubular worms. Towards the middle of this period, the first vegetarian reptiles come. There are great deposits of coal and iron.